I would encourage every single person who is committed to social justice, to environmental justice, to climate change policy, to make sure that when you sit down and you shop for yourself and for others, to not forget about all of the change that you want to create.
Welcome back to another episode of Responsible Impact, a production of Magic Links. We connect brands and influencers in e-commerce, and so this is the show where we take a closer look at the impact and innovation these industries have when it comes to the environment. Today we're joined by Saloni Doshi of EcoEnclose and her story of taking a small company and then growing it to be not only bigger, but an innovator in the industry. I, for one, didn't realize how much went into making packaging sustainable, and given the immense surge in e-commerce that COVID has sparked, these responsible, quality alternatives to traditional packaging are just what we need. Plus, her realness is so lovely. After this episode, you'll never again look at your packages for just what's inside them, and your trips to the post office or your assessment of the materials in your recycling bin will suddenly feel a lot more nuanced. On that note, let's dive in, shall we?
Yeah, hi, my name is Saloni Doshi. I'm the CEO at EcoEnclose, and EcoEnclose is a leading provider in sustainable packaging for e-commerce businesses. So we serve, about 20 to 30,000 businesses a year that range from little tiny Etsy shops that are just doing, maybe some beautiful jewelry that they're crafting at home to, some of the largest Fortune 500 brands in the country. My husband and I bought the business in 2015, and we bought it from a woman who had started a cloth diapers brand called Thirsties. And in starting a cloth diaper brand, you're pretty committed to the environment. So when she started that brand, she got really frustrated that you really had to ship out all of these cloth diapers in virgin plastic that was made in China. And that sort of led her down this path of trying to see if there was a better option. And so she had this sort of tiny little business of more sustainable poly mailers that she wasn't really interested in growing. And so we met her and decided to take over her business. And so that was just an amazing pivot point in my life with my husband, because we had always wanted to run our own business, and to find one that was small but had so much potential and incredibly aligned with our lifestyle values was just, a dream come true.
When you look at traditional packaging and you open something from, like let's say Amazon, just because they're shipping so much of what's, of what's available right now, what do you see that maybe the average person wouldn't see in regards to packaging?
Yeah, I think when I see something from Amazon or from Target or Staples, I see a lot of efficiency and, operational efficiency in it. I think, Amazon's gotten a lot of good heat, I think, for the fact that you'll sometimes get like a little pen, but it'll be in this huge box with all this plastic in it. And, that is all by design. You think about Amazon, everything that they've done is to figure out how to get orders out as fast as possible and with as little human intervention as possible. So as many robots as possible. And that's what you see. I mean, you just feel this industrial utility sort of approach when you see that their packaging. And I think that's what they're really good at.
Recognizing there's potential and then like the journey of making it come to life, I'm sure those are two very different things, right? Like kind of tell us how things grew.
I had come from a background in sustainable agriculture and management consulting. So for the 5 years prior to us buying the business, I was working with towns and cities and counties across the country trying to revitalize their agriculture and turn it into more of a sustainable non-commodity crop agriculture. So that's sort of the background that I brought into EcoEnclose. And I think it's pretty easy when you start getting into a business like this. All you see is opportunity on the sustainability front in particular. And you just look across. We bought this business with just a handful of product lines, and you look at them, it's like each product line can be more sustainable. We had at the time an 88% recycled poly mailer, which at the time was the most amount of recycled content you could get in the poly mailer. And it was, the obvious question is, well, why isn't it 100%? You get some answers back from your manufacturing partner and you say, well, just try it. And then they come back and they say, okay, well, there's some weaknesses or some manufacturing issues. And you say, well, what if we did this? Or what if we changed the color? And so it just became this very iterative process of how do you keep introducing newer, better, more sustainable products that are also going to be functionally meeting the needs of e-commerce brands. So that was sort of the first thing you see when you look at the product suite or when we bought the business. And then I think the other trend that was happening was that e-commerce, was already very popular in 2015, but certainly it has come a very long way since then. And so we got in there and it was very clear that the industry itself was growing. And every day you have, thousands of new hopeful entrepreneurs that start e-commerce brands. I think the other thing we saw was, my husband is in finance. His background is a little bit more in finance and acquisitions and stuff, and mine was in management consulting. And we realized we have this access point to customers just by the fact that we would be offering them packaging, but we can also help them to be successful. So we got really committed to, like, how do we create content that helps customers be successful, be more sustainable, be better? Because the dream started becoming, well, we're not just a packaging company, but how can we be a platform where, if people start working with us, they can also sort of feel the support and be a better brand. And if they're a better brand, if the best brands in this country are the ones that care about sustainability, like, then all of a sudden you have a movement.
You've mentioned poly a couple times, and I think a lot of people are going to be unfamiliar with what you mean by that. So if we could back it up just a second and give kind of a definition on that.
Yeah, you mean people don't like to geek out about packaging the way that I do, apparently.
Not yet. They're about to be after this
Not
episode.
yet. Yeah, so, this is now like packaging 101 or e-commerce packaging 101. But, when you think about, if you got a product to sell, you really have three basic options of how to ship it right now. You've got a shipping box, or you've got like a mailer, which is like a big envelope. And in the mailer category, you can have a mailer that's made of paper, or you can have a mailer that's made of plastic. And so when I say poly mailer, it's one of those like plastic bags almost that you get, if you order clothing from somebody, you'll probably get it in a poly mailer. So that's what I'm referring to.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know that there's also been this big shift in terms of like recycled things, algae, tape, like just a bunch of the actual materials that go into the mailer. So while we're talking about poly stuff, tell me more about like the specific materials where you guys have really been leaders and made changes.
Yeah, really great question. I think, shipping boxes, paper mailers, and poly mailers, like, those are pretty standard materials. And all we have really focused on is, how do you get more recycled content in them? And how do you get more post-consumer waste in them? That has been like the driving force of our innovation. But then you look at other aspects of shipping packaging, and there becomes some exciting innovation opportunities. So you mentioned algae ink, and a company called Living Ink Technologies back in 2017 had invented this idea of making ink and making the pigment in ink in particular with algae cells. Even sustainable inks today that are widely commercially available, even if they say that they're soy-based or water-based, their pigment is still made with petroleum-based products. And pigment makes up about 20% of a bucket of ink. So their big aha was, hey, we can turn algae cells into actual pigment. And they were this like nascent brand or company trying to figure this out. And they reached out to us to see if we could, screen print something for them. And it ended up becoming this really incredible partnership. And we learned how to test and use their algae ink. We helped them refine it. And now we can offer it. I mean, I think yesterday we realized that we had done this year alone 5 million packages that were printed with algae ink this year, which a couple years ago was like a non-existent technology. So that's an example where we find this small little piece of the packaging and we think, how can this be better? Or we find a technology that has made it better. And we're like, how can we make this commercially available? How can we make this scale?
This brings up a couple questions for me, but the one that I'll dive into first is that there are a lot of people who I think would like to be as iterative and as sort of opportunistic in the good way, where you see all these opportunities at every little corner of a package to maybe make it better. But I think a lot of people don't have the stream of income to support them while they're iterating. Do you think that because you guys happen to be riding the wave of e-commerce at a time when it is cresting and continuing to grow, that you sort of had a little bit of luck of the draw on that? Or were there other things that allowed you to be able to hold your breath, as it were, while you were iterating, to be able to get to these wonderful, innovative products?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually think what happened fortuitously, the luck of the draw that happened for us, is that because almost maybe riding the crest of sustainability, which, and maybe the intersection of sustainability and e-commerce, but early on, even when we only served like 500 to 1,000 customers a year, these were people who were deeply committed to sustainability. And we had enough larger clients in that mix that were willing to take a flyer on some of these new technologies, that because we had this unique access point into a group of customers that was so committed to sustainability that they were willing to pay for it, even when it was an untested technology. That was like really the sweet spot that we had. So this algae ink, we had a company called Bedrock Sandals. We have this company, we've been working with them since, we bought the business. They're an incredible company. And right when we announced the fact that, hey, who wants to test algae ink with us? They were like, we're on this. This is how we need to be printing our boxes. And they were willing to pay for it. And we had a handful of customers like that are like, I got this, put me in and I'll pay for the testing. So I think that is the ability that gave us to iterate. And now several years later, we've refined it so that it's actually, I think, a better ink than the traditional black ink counterpart. And now everybody wants it, even if they're not as committed to sustainability. It's sort of be early adopters.
Not being somebody who works with these inks, but now somebody who's very curious about them. What is it about it that makes it, you think, a better ink than what came before?
Yeah, it's. I wish I had a video so I can show you. I mean, the first. Well, let's back up. Within the ink world, the biggest challenge that ink companies have always had is getting a pure black from a renewable source. It's always been a little bit gray or a little bit muted. And early on, I think the algae inks were a little bit muted. They also clumped up in our print machines. So you would get like some blotchiness, maybe every 10th print, you would get a little bit of blotchiness. So those are a couple of the types of issues that we're talking about. And now those things have really gone away. And the black is so rich. It's really beautiful. And, working with it is simple things like when you work with traditional water-based inks, you have to really scrub hard or your hands would be stained for a day or two, maybe if you got a lot of ink on your hands. With algae ink, it really just washes off. I mean, it's amazing. So there's a lot of because it's so sustainable and because it's algae cells, it's a lot easier for our workers to work with. It's easier for them to smell. There's a lot of reasons why that part of it has become much better for our team.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, that's we've had a couple of different technologies like that. So another example is the ZeroWaste Liner label, which is, you have to be really geeked out on packaging, but every time you ship something, you got a shipping label, right? You peel it off. And then you're left with this release liner.
Yes.
Every time you basically have a label, that release liner, 99.9% of the ones that are made today are not recyclable. They're virgin paper with a silicone coating on it that gives you the release properties. And a company reached out to us and said, hey, we have this technology it's a patented technology that can be a 100% recycled and curbside recyclable release liner that doesn't contain that silicone on it. And we said, oh, yeah, we're in. We just basically placed an order. We started working with them. Everybody was super excited about it. And then 6 months later, we started getting reports that the labels were peeling off. The adhesive just wasn't strong enough. And we were finding that in our own shop as well. And so we then started working with the adhesive companies and the patented technology to figure out how do we get a better, stronger adhesive, but still maintain this really difficult patented process that allows this unique release liner to be used. And it took a year after we identified this as a challenge to come up with a better solution. And then last June, we released a new version of these labels that are incredible. They're so strong. They're stronger than traditional labels, and they use a higher strength adhesive. And now our customers are overjoyed, and they've really been patient, sort of watching this journey and waiting for something better and sharing their feedback without malice. I mean, it was an amazing representation, I think, of the community of customers we get to work with.
That makes my heart very, very happy too.
Yeah, it does.
It sounds a common thread, I should say, through these stories that you're sharing is really a partnership relationship. This isn't the traditional sort of, well, we found another vendor who could do it. Is this kind of the way that you guys have evolved the business in a whole, is really in partnership with these other folks?
Yeah, I love that you said that. We have this one of our 5 core values is that we are eco allies, and we mean that for our customers, and we mean that for our supply chain partners. And that really is, I hope, something that's helped us set ourselves apart. We work with about 17 different manufacturing partners around the U.S. Every single one of them, save probably 1 or 2, are ones that have, at some point taken a flyer on us. So maybe they've changed the adhesive formulation for us. Maybe they've all adopted algae ink upon our very urgent request. And so now all of them have figured out how to use algae ink in their own printing processes. And it took them a decent amount of time and faith in us to do that. They've all sort of made design changes, and they've always been willing to add more post-consumer waste or more recycled content. And sometimes they'll throw their hands up in the air like, I don't think this is going to work, but we'll try it for you. And I think because they recognize that, hey, sustainability is a trend. So even frankly, if they're not, deeply emotionally committed to sustainability, I think all of these partners realize that if they can get better at sustainability, that's just going to be a boon for their business as well. And I think they see us as almost like the forefront partner to help them grow and become more progressive in that space, which will only in turn make them better.
In terms of things like tape and tissue paper and all the little like accoutrements, if I wanted to be fancy, what sometimes I'm suspect when I see that something is like, part post-consumer recycled paper, and I think, well, but how much, right? And the process to recapture and re-prepare and repurpose those fibers. Just take me into all of that portion, if you would.
And do you mean like take you into the nitty gritty of recycling?
Oh my God, take me wherever you want to go. I trust you. Lead me.
Yeah, well, we have become a little bit more understanding. I'll say this first about we've just become more patient when people say, I can't put more post-consumer waste in that. Or 5 years ago, I was like, well, why not? Just do it. And now I think I've grown to understand the limitations that our current recycling and reclaiming and remanufacturing technology has to work with some of these types of materials. And so for me to make that, I guess, statement a little bit more clear, I mean, one of our founding principles is the idea is that if you want to be able to recycle something as a consumer, you have to be responsible about buying recycled content. And I think people don't understand that it is a circular supply chain. And so every time you put a piece of paper in the recycling bin, the only reason that that is possible is because some manufacturer or some paper mill on the other side is willing to buy that back up at a price point that allows what they call a MRF, materials recovery facility, which is where your blue bin goes. That MRF has to sort out every single thing you put into the blue bin into these like bales. So you'll put in that blue bin will become a bale of recycled PET bottles, a bale of recycled newspapers, a bale of recycled corrugate, and then that MRF is sitting on all that, saying, okay, I need to. It's just a commodities market. I need to figure out where I'm going to sell each of these and at what price point. And if they can't sell that stuff at a price point that allows for them to manage their operation, then they're not going to be able to take your recycling. And so you as a consumer are pushing that material into the recycling stream. Do your part by then buying it back and creating the pull of the demand. And the more and more we all do that as consumers and as businesses, the higher price point that these MRFs can fetch for these materials, and the more investments that manufacturing companies are willing to make in equipment that can take some of the degraded quality that comes from recycling, because almost all materials, with the exception of aluminum, almost all materials will degrade a little bit with each time they get recycled. So that's my sort of spiel on recycling, that, don't forget that your responsibility, if you want to be a recycler, your responsibility is to buy recycled.
I'm very glad that you went there. I want to say thank you. Is there anything else in terms of materials or things that you want to give us a behind the scenes glimpse on?
No, I mean, we have a wish list. I mean, I will say, like, every year we have a wish list of materials that we know that are popular that we want to find a better solution for. An example is I'm literally looking outside and I'm watching our warehouse guys, get a pallet ready for freight, and we cannot find pallet shrink wrap that isn't made with that isn't virgin. And so, like, every year I'm trying to find a way to make that happen, a 100% recycled shrink wrap for pallets. And so even though I'm really proud of some of the advancements we've made, the list is endless of places that I want to continue growing and improving.
I think that dovetails really nicely with what everybody involved in sustainability is seeing. I recently heard somebody describe it as sort of a yes and process.
Yes,
And I thought
good.
that was so great, because anybody who knows anybody who's gone to improv, they will tell you, they're like, oh yeah, the first rule is yes and. And I was like, that it kind of in a meta way, it makes sense, because really we are all improving. And
yeah, just
so,
trying to get better every day.
Yeah. And so, yes. And, okay. So any sort of challenges like, getting funding, finding the right people, finding the right suppliers, and being able to sort of keep the wheels on your cart. What's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I look back and it's all it has been is challenges, and I would say what people say after they've made the journey is something that I would tell others, which is like you've got to get to a point where every challenge looks like an opportunity for you. Otherwise, you should not decide to go into business and run your own business. And so, that is actually a true statement as I look at the arc of our growth. I think through every year I run into we have no external funding, so we're completely self-funded. And every year I have 2 or 3 periods where I'm like, oh, can we even pay the bills? How can we do this? And that's incredibly challenging and very much keeps me up at night. And then, dealing with people challenges has been something that I continue to struggle with. I find a lot of joy in it when I can turn somebody around at work and really help them get on a path to real success professionally, especially when it's one of my warehouse workers where, they don't have a lot of people who are investing in them. When I turn them around and put them on a path for success, it really makes my heart glow. On the flip side, I think when I have to let somebody go or I'm having a real challenge, it weighs me down and I haven't figured out how to get through that. But yeah, I mean, again, I mentioned about the business with my husband, and we have 3 kids, and there is nothing more rewarding and challenging than running a business that you are passionate about and your husband's passionate about, and managing your household and creating separation, and managing the intensity has been something we've learned how to do, and I think we do very well now. But it has built some marital lows, I will say, over the last 5 years.
God, I so appreciate that honesty. There's often this sort of pretend demarcation, right, between home and work, but we're all people. And the functional boundary between, I think, those two places is actually really quite porous. So, truly, thank you for your honesty. Are there other things or innovations that you're really excited about right now?
2 things that I'm super excited about. One is glassine bags, which is, how excited can you get about packaging? I can get very excited, but I think glassine bags is the type of thing that everybody can get excited about. If you have anybody who's been following the outdoor industry for any time, I think is probably aware of the fact that. So I was talking about poly mailers. There's another thing in the apparel industry in particular, which are poly bags. They're like the clear plastic bag that almost every article of clothing that you might order online will come in. And the reason that the clear poly bag exists is because most people are manufacturing their goods in, say China or abroad. And then those factories are putting each individual article of clothing in a clear plastic bag, throwing all of them into a big shipping box, and then it's coming here to go to a fulfillment center. And then the fulfillment center is, getting the order, and they want everything in plastic bags so that it's like really clean and easy for them to use, and they can scan a barcode through it, etc. So for the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, the fashion and apparel outdoor gear industry has been trying to figure out like, how can I do away with this awful plastic bag that we're all trying to get rid of unnecessary plastic, and glassine bags is one answer to that. And the idea is that glassine is a virgin paper, but it's translucent. It's like if you've ever been to a bakery, it's sort of that material that you might get like a muffin in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this paper, 100% pure paper, but it has like a coating to it based on how it's called super calendar. It's highly pressurized to create that slight coating, the translucency, and the weather protection. The idea is that these glassine bags could solve this. They're just paper bags where a factory can, instead of putting in a clear plastic bag, they're putting it in this glassine bag. It's coming here. It's translucent enough for you to see what's inside of it, to be able to scan a barcode in it. And then at the end of the day, it's curbside recyclable, or if you must, you can compost it as well. And that's really exciting.
What's the coating that makes it translucent? Is that a kind of a plastic or something, or is that an
No,
additional
yeah,
paper
it's
product?
100% paper.
Oh.
Wow, you really love the packaging. I love that. So traditionally, basically, when you make a regular paper, it goes through like one roller to press it, 1 or 2 maybe. What glassine is it's super calendared, which means it goes like it almost like sandwiches through like the back and forth through, up to 10 rollers that are applying a lot of heat in each time it goes through the roller. And what it basically does is it's taking the fibers of the paper and pressing them down in the exact same direction over and over again in a way that actually like chemically changes the capillaries of the paper and turns it into this sort of smooth surface, and also gives it the translucency.
So I'm imagining basically the croissant of paper products where it keeps getting rolled out. Is that?
Yeah, basically.
Crazy.
That's basically it, except not so nearly so delicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine. um, that does sound really interesting because one of the things that another guest recently discussed was that in the packaging for their shoes, they were like, manufacturers take this big risk when they ship something that it's not going to be damaged and of less value when it reaches you as the consumer. And so to think that there's something like this that's so reasonable, it is exciting. Actually, it really
Yeah,
is.
it is. It's so exciting. And then we are also hopefully next week launching what we're calling the EcoX mailer, but it's basically 100% post-consumer waste paper mailer, but it is two qualities that are really interesting. One is that it's pretty water resistant. We literally like poured a glass of water on top of it and it didn't soak through.
Shut up.
And so that's really exciting. And that's due to something called a sizing agent. And almost all paper has sizing agents in it, but nobody's ever thought to put a hydrophobic, which is like a water repellent sizing agent, into a mailer, which now seems sort of like obvious.
Wow. Yeah.
And then it's also very, very high quality for a recycled mailer. And the reason for that is that the source material for all of that post-consumer waste is a very clean source. So for somebody who's like, I've never been able to find a paper alternative to a poly mailer, this is your answer.
Wow. Um, is it me being too persnickety to wonder what it being hydrophobic means for its sort of reuse?
No, yeah, it's a great question, one that we spent a lot of time asking. The sizing agent is such a tiny, like every single paper that you hold in your hand has some sort of sizing agent in it. So, for example, a paper towel has a sizing agent that is the opposite, that's like hydroabsorbent. Toilet paper is the same way. A lot of copy paper has stuff that's a little bit more hydrophobic. So they do a lot of things. This particular, it's less than 1% of its weight is that sizing agent, and it's been tested to have absolutely no impact on its compostability or recyclability. So that's the type of thing that we do spend a lot of time analyzing. So when somebody comes to us and say, "Hey, why don't you try a sizing agent?" before we would even consider it, we would ask those questions about end of life before we went down that path.
Wow. I want to come hang out with you guys. So, when we talk about what it means for packaging to be more sustainable, right? And we've talked about how that's a constantly advancing horizon. Is there anything else in there that you would want to talk about for people to sit with after the episode when they're going about the rest of their day, or as the holidays come up, preparing their own packaging?
Oh yeah. What does it mean for a package to be sustainable? This is the question that I think every company that really deeply cares about sustainability is probably grapples with at some point. Um, yeah, my first recommendation to any company, whether or not, I think I want, whether or not they want to work with us or not, is before you start looking at packaging options, take the time to really figure out your sort of sustainability framework as a company. And what I mean by that is that there's something called these 9 planetary boundaries, which you may or may not know about, but they're
Mm-mm.
this idea that there isn't just one challenge sort of threatening the planet, right? There's I think the 9 planetary boundaries includes things like, carbon, obviously, right? There's a boundary to how much carbon we can emit into our planet until really bad things happen. There is a boundary to how much polluting we can do to our waters before it has this catastrophic impact. There's a boundary to how much soil we can degrade. So those are 3 examples of the 9 planetary boundaries. And I think reading that framework helps you understand that it's not just one thing. It's not just your carbon emissions. It's not just water usage or water pollution, that there are these, scientists have spent a lot of time thinking about these 9 different things that can damage the planet. And I think sit with that as a company and figure out, based on your values as a leader of the company and the products that you're selling, which planetary boundaries are you really want to focus your business on minimizing? And then really dedicate itself to that. And you actually end up with pretty different decisions. So, the classic example is if you really focus on carbon emissions and you want your business to be about having the lowest carbon footprint possible, then today, if you're choosing between paper, plastic, and bioplastic, you should go with 100% recycled plastic because it has the lowest carbon footprint of the 3 options, and just compared 1 to 1. However, if you're really focused on, microplastics in the ocean and plastic ocean pollution in general, and the use of petroleum as an input into goods, like if that's really the boundary or the issue you want to focus on, then the decision of paper versus plastic versus bioplastic is paper all the way. And I think there's valid reasons why a company might choose one or the other. And the point is to just don't make that decision when you're on the packaging company's website about to place the order, and then build your entire sustainable packaging framework then around the product that you buy. Take the time to build your framework and then start to build your strategy for your products and your packaging all in line in a way that sort of support that same framework.
In the time we have left, walk me through how transparency has factored into your business.
It's a great question. I think there's a bunch of layers to transparency. We took the step last year of creating a bill of materials, which is a document on our website that takes every single category of product that we offer and bullets out everything you would want to know about the materials that went into it. And every bullet in that document is supported by like a signed letter from our supplier or our supplier's supplier, or an audit that we've conducted to verify that this bullet point is true. And so for example, for our tape, it will say, okay, well, our water activated tape is 50% recycled. I have a letter verifying from the mill that that produces that paper that is a 50% recycled, content that's going into it. So that's like the level of detail that we've gone into for the bill of materials. That was a really important step because it actually opened up, I would say 10% of the bullets that we had originally put in the bill of materials, we actually took a long time to find supporting documentation for, and a couple of the bullets we had to change. So that exercise created in me a very deep amount of confidence that like the supply chain and the things that we're saying around our products are in fact true. So then the next step, I think, after that is when you think about it, it's like certification. So an external third party saying, hey, everything that EcoEnclose is saying in this bill of materials, I've also vetted as this third party auditor. I've vetted that it's true. I would encourage every single person who is committed to social justice, to environmental justice, to climate change policy, to make sure that when you sit down and you shop for yourself and for others, to not forget about all of the change that you want to create, because no matter where politics and policy goes, so much change happens in this country based on how money is spent, and through sort of the capitalist structure. And we can vocalize our frustration about capitalism all we want, but recognize that we're players within capitalism. And so, if you care about something, if you want to support a movement of some sort, then when you're sitting down to do your Christmas shopping or whatever, like don't go to Amazon and buy the cheapest, most convenient, or just whatever the best thing that you can see there. Take the time to find companies who have the leadership teams that resemble the diversity that you want, that run their business ethically, and that pay everybody well, etc. Like find those 20, 30, 40 companies and support them with your dollars, and maybe exclusively support them. And if every single person that marched also did that, I would be hard pressed to think that real change wouldn't happen, and frankly, probably happen much more quickly.
I feel so fortunate to have had so many thoughtful, articulate guests on this show. After hearing a case that compelling, I mean, what's left to do but roll the credits, huh? Credits this episode go to Hazel Shin, Brian Nickerson, Autumn Collins, and Saloni Doshi of EcoEnclose. They are at EcoEnclose.com, and let's be real, you should totally bookmark their page. We're about to jump into the official holiday season, and with that in mind, stay safe, be responsible about your impact, and be sure to subscribe to the show. I'm Natalie, and I'm out. Till next time, gang.